Hey everybody, this is the first of a series of videos providing a statement analysis of the words spoken by Andrew Windsor, third child of the late Queen Elizabeth II, in his interview with Emily Maitlis from BBC Newsnight in November 2019. I share the transcripts on screen and provide subtitles of my commentary, but unfortunately the BBC don't allow permission to use clips of their material. If you want to watch the interview itself, you can find it on YouTube by searching for Andrew and the Epstein scandal BBC Newsnight. I hope you find this analysis interesting. Let me know in the comments. Here we go. So, the first thing to note is that Andrew decided to invite Newsnight to Buckingham Palace. So I would suggest that this is probably part of his strategy to hide behind his royal status. It would have been much easier for Andrew to have gone to the Newsnight studios. There would not have been the very expensive and time-consuming set-up costs of building a temporary studio in Buckingham Palace. But as I said, I think this is Andrew hiding behind his royal status. Emily Maitlis kicks off the interview with the following. She says, "We've come to Buckingham Palace in highly unusual circumstances. Normally, we'd be discussing your work, your duty. We'll come on to that. But today, you've chosen to speak out for the first time. Why have you decided to talk now?" Andrew replies, "Because there is no good time to talk about Mr. Epstein and all things associated. We've been talking to Newsnight for about 6 months about doing something around the work that I was doing. And unfortunately, we've just not been able to fit it into either your schedule or my schedule until now. And actually, it's a very good opportunity, and I'm delighted to be able to see you today." So Andrew refers to Epstein as Mr. Epstein, which shows a positive linguistic disposition. It's showing respect that is perhaps a little unexpected in the circumstances. Additionally, this is about Andrew and his behaviour. It's actually not about Epstein, or it shouldn't be. So this is deflecting attention away from himself. He goes on to say all things associated, which is vague, and it shows avoidance of actually specifically naming the things that Andrew is there to talk about. So instead of naming the allegations, he goes on to deflect attention away from that further by talking about how he's been in negotiations with Newsnight for about 6 months, which is unnecessary and irrelevant information. So right from the start, Andrew is attempting to deflect attention away from himself and to distance himself from the allegations that have been made against him, but also distance himself from the behaviour of Epstein. I mean, it is surprising that he shows such respect for Epstein by using the word Mr., and it's a leak that he still does respect Epstein. Andrew then says, actually, it's a very good opportunity, but he doesn't say a good opportunity for what, so there's missing information. He doesn't explain why he thinks it's a good opportunity. And by using the word actually, he is comparing very good opportunity with something else that he again isn't mentioning. It would be more accurate to describe this situation as most unfortunate rather than seeing it as a good opportunity. It's a misfortune that Andrew is having to give this interview to Newsnight. So the word actually could well be covering the fact that in reality he knows that he is in a very unfortunate situation, and that characterising it as being a very good opportunity is a need to persuade, and that he doesn't actually believe that himself. The term need to persuade is used when the speaker is using qualifying language to try to convince us of something that is likely either only partially true or not true at all. The famous line from Shakespeare, "The lady doth protest too much, methinks," or in this case the gentleman, captures the idea that someone is overdoing a denial or a claim to the point where it has become suspicious. In my opinion, there's further need to persuade when he says, "I'm delighted to be able to see you today." How he could genuinely feel this emotion of delight at the prospect of having to talk through his association with Epstein is actually unbelievable, and he is being deceptive. He is almost certainly purposefully misrepresenting how he feels here, trying to put a positive spin on the situation and taking other people for fools, in my opinion, in the process, if he thinks anyone is going to believe him. Emily's next question is, as you say, all of this goes back to your friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. How did you first become friends? How did you meet? Andrew replies, well, I met through his girlfriend back in 1999, who, and I'd known her since she was at university in the UK, and it would be a stretch to say that as it were, we were close friends. I mean, we were friends because of other people. So in the first part, he says, I met through his girlfriend. Two things to note here is that there's a missing name pronoun. So he doesn't say I met Epstein or I met him. He just says I met through. And this is sensitive. It is distancing himself from Epstein. And then he also doesn't name his girlfriend, which is obviously Ghislaine Maxwell. And this too is sensitive and distancing, indicating that he doesn't really want to be associated with her either. It's what we call in statement analysis an incomplete social introduction. Generally, if a relationship is positive, then we'll expect somebody to give the name and their relationship to the person, and also to use the personal pronoun my to show ownership and the importance of the relationship to the person. For example, compare my wife Jane with the wife, and Andrew doesn't do this. The next thing to note is that Andrew loses verbal fluency quite significantly. He uses lots of fillers, and this is an indication of tension or anxiety, that he's not really comfortable talking about how he met Epstein. Loss of fluency through more frequent use of fillers and hesitancy, stuttering, when it's different from baseline, is a sign that the person may not be speaking direct from their experiential memory, and that the process of direct and honest recall from memory is being disrupted by the person having the additional cognitive task of thinking about what they need to not say, and possibly also remembering or making up false or misdirecting information. When he says it would be, he is not actually saying it is. So this is in reference to it would be to some extent a stretch. He's saying it would be not it is a stretch. So this is sensitive. Using conditional verbs like would introduces a hypothetical or conditional element to the statement and indicates that what the person is saying is not definitive. With sentences that use would, we expect to have another clause added to explain why the person is speaking conditionally. For example, I would like to go but I can't afford it, or maths would be easy if it wasn't for algebra. So, Andrew says it would be a stretch, but doesn't explain why he is speaking conditionally or hypothetically. He doesn't tell us what the missing condition is, and so we have to ask, what is he not telling us? The further sensitivity markers for it would be is that he says it would be to some extent, which is minimising, and then he also says as it were, which is minimising again. As it were is a shortened form of as if it were so, and both these speech elements are distancing and weakening from the statement it would be a stretch. So there's three separate factors that indicate it actually isn't a stretch to say they were close friends. He then says, I mean, we were friends because of other people. And this shows a psychological disposition to blame shift. He's not taking responsibility for his friendship, he's shifting the blame onto other people. This is perhaps another example of Andrew's tendency to hide behind others, to shield himself or absolve himself from responsibility. It could perhaps indicate a sense of entitlement, that he feels he can do whatever he likes and avoid accountability by claiming others and not he are at fault. In the next part of his answer to this same question, Andrew says, and I had a lot of opportunity to go to the United States, but I didn't have much time with him. I suppose I saw him once or twice a year, perhaps maybe maximum of 3 times a year, and quite often if I was in the United States and doing things, and if he wasn't there, he would say, well, why don't you come and use my houses? So I said, that's very kind, thank you very much indeed. The first thing Andrew mentions is that he had a lot of opportunity to go to the United States. And this is really unnecessary information. We don't need to know that. It's not answering the question, and it's likely just deflection. In telling us how many times a year he used to see Epstein, he starts the sentence with the phrase, I suppose, which is weakening and indicates his uncertainty. If he was sure how many times a year he used to see him, he would just say, I saw him about 3 times a year. But he's not telling us that. He's saying, I suppose, and then he says once or twice a year, perhaps maybe maximum of 3 times a year. So there's a lot of uncertainty in this part of his answer, and it indicates that it's unreliable. Not only does he start by saying, I suppose, he follows with the numbers 1, 2 and 3 and adds 2 non-committal words, perhaps and maybe, resulting in so much equivocation that the sentence is rendered more or less meaningless. Such equivocation can be a liar's trick of being so vague and non-committal that they are not really saying anything, although sounding like they are to the untrained ear. It enables them to change their stories later if information comes to light that seems to contradict what they have said. For example, if irrefutable evidence comes out that Andrew visited Epstein much more frequently than 3 times a year, he can legitimately say, well, I only said I suppose it was perhaps maybe 3 times a year. I didn't say it definitely was. It is a sign of withheld information and possibly deception. He then goes on to introduce two hypothetical scenarios. If I was in the United States and if he wasn't there, so we have to ask, did those things actually happen? If they did happen, we would expect him to say, when I was in the United States and when he wasn't there. But he is not saying this, so this is very sensitive. It isn't answering the question, so it's unnecessary information, and it's likely to be a form of alibi building where Andrew's getting ahead of the game, trying to explain away why he was sometimes at Epstein's houses when Epstein himself wasn't there, and to give some kind of innocent explanation. So we are left not knowing how frequently he used Epstein's houses when Epstein wasn't there, or if this happened at all. Using hypothetical if statements is another way of being vague and non-committal, and again, it can enable someone to change their story later. For example, I only said if I was there, I didn't say I was there. It's a sign of withheld information and possibly deception. It is quite ludicrous that a prince of the United Kingdom would need to rely on somebody like Epstein to have somewhere to stay, as if he didn't have the resources and all the contacts in the world. He could have stayed with anybody he wanted to as a guest. Money wasn't an object anyway, so for him to then state, "That's very kind, thank you very much indeed," in my opinion, demonstrates Andrew's lack of judgment and poor character. It is distasteful, vulgar, and undignified that such a privileged person with access to untold wealth would take freebies from a private person, regardless of how wealthy that person was, especially as he had clearly not done his due diligence to ensure they were someone of good standing. This is something his mother would not have done in a million years, because she understood the need to protect the reputation of the monarchy, and that the behaviour of members of the British royal family has to be unimpeachable. Andrew, in his arrogance, did not think such self-restraint and need for discretion applied to him. He got caught with his hands in the cookie jar and his pants down, and he has brought shame and disrepute on himself and by association on the UK monarchy itself. He left himself wide open to being severely compromised and to being in just the kind of mess and disgrace he is now in. It raises so many questions about what was the attraction for Andrew to stay in Epstein's houses when he wasn't there, and what was the attraction for Epstein to want Andrew to stay in his houses when he wasn't there, and generally there is a sense that he is concealing important information here. In the last part of Andrew's answer to the question, how did you first become friends? How did you meet? He says the following, but it would be a considerable stretch to say that he was a very, very close friend, but he had the most extraordinary ability to bring extraordinary people together, and that's the bits that I remember, is going to the dinner parties where you would meet academics, politicians, people from the United Nations. I mean, it was a cosmopolitan group of what I would describe as US eminence. There's a significant loss of verbal fluency again when talking about how close a friend Andrew was with Epstein. Clearly, he's not comfortable talking about this at all, I would suggest. As said previously, loss of fluency through more frequent use of fillers and hesitancy, stuttering when it's different from baseline, is a sign that the person may not be speaking directly from their experiential memory of what actually happened and what they actually thought and felt. and it is a sign of disruption to the process of direct and honest recall from memory. The very strong social taboo against lying and the often very serious social sanctions for those who are caught lying is what causes the tension and anxiety to become elevated and produces these unwanted speech effects. He repeats the conditional tense, it would be a considerable stretch to say that he was a very, very close friend, which again, he's not telling us he wasn't a very, very close friend. He's only saying it would be a stretch. He's not telling us it is a stretch or it was a stretch. There's also a change in language, so he's gone from saying it would be a stretch to it would be a considerable stretch, and from close friend to very, very close friend. So it seems that Andrew is ramping things up in his need to persuade us that he and Epstein were not close friends. But the harder he tries to persuade us, the more it seems that he's being unreliable. Why does he want to convince us so much that he and Epstein were not close friends, when all the evidence actually indicates that they were? He wasn't asked how close their friendship was, and so his offering of this unrequested information is a sign of potential rehearsal, and that it is likely he had pre-prepared this answer in an attempt to persuade us he was more distant from Epstein than he actually was. So after trying very hard to persuade us that he was not close friends with Epstein, I would suggest unsuccessfully, he then goes on to use the term but and give reasons for why he was friends with Epstein. When the word but appears in someone's language, it tends to cancel out, or as we say, negate what comes before. So if you imagine someone saying, I love you, but, you know that the most important part of that sentence is not the I love you, it's the bit that comes after but. The fact that Andrew uses the word but directly after this attempt to persuade us he was not close friends with Epstein is yet another factor making his claims of not being close friends unreliable and likely deceptive. He explains that Epstein had the most extraordinary ability, so we would not expect, under the circumstances, for Andrew to be praising Epstein in any way. Nonetheless, he does so. He says that he had the most extraordinary ability to bring extraordinary people together. It seems that what he's doing here is he's justifying his friendship with Epstein. This is not answering the question, how did you first become friends or how did you meet? He hasn't been asked, why were you friends? But he is choosing to give this information anyway, and so it is sensitive. He's likely in alibi building mode here, giving plausible reasons for why he was friends with Epstein that might not necessarily be either true or the whole truth. So not only does Andrew describe Epstein as extraordinary, he also says that Epstein gathered together around him extraordinary people. So he's clearly including himself in that group of extraordinary people, which is grandiose and self-serving and demonstrates Andrew's very high opinion of himself. Perhaps Andrew didn't realise that he was calling himself extraordinary, and I would suggest that it is his lack of self-awareness in this interview and how he does come across as having a very high opinion of himself that's probably one of the main reasons why the interview didn't go down well, which is an understatement. In the part of Andrew's answer where he says, that's the bit that I remember is going to the dinner parties, it seems to me that he's priming the audience that he only remembers certain things. In telling us that's the bit that I remember, he is pointing to other parts of his memory that he's indicating he doesn't remember, but in order to point to them, he knows they're there. So ironically, he is telling us that there are other things that he remembers that he's not choosing to talk about. Saying that's the bit that I remember is unnecessary information as well, and so it is very sensitive. Andrew has said it for a reason, to try to persuade that he doesn't remember the other bits. But he has leaked in his language choices that he knows there are other bits. And to know is to remember, because both knowing and remembering involve retrieval from memory. So this part is an indication, we're getting an early warning that his memory is very selective, and I would suggest choicefully so. In the last part of his answer to this question, how did you first become friends, how did you meet, which predominantly he has not answered. In the last part, he talks about meeting academics, politicians, people from the United Nations at the dinner parties. One of the things to bear in mind is that Andrew did not need Epstein in order to meet such people. With his status as the son of the monarch in the UK, he could basically have his pick of anyone in the world to meet. So it's a little bit disingenuous to cite these dinner parties where he'd meet all these eminent US people as reasons for his friendship with Epstein. So in summary, for the answer to this first question, how did you first become friends, how did you meet? Andrew gives long, rambling responses, predominantly not answering the question. He provides unnecessary and deflecting information. He gives unrequested reasons and unrequested explanations for things he hasn't been asked about yet, all of which are sensitivity indicators pointing to him likely being in need to persuade and alibi building mode. So withheld information is likely, as is deception.